We're here to talk about supply chains and where the industry is headed. And this is going to be a joint presentation with Amanda Falkner, Hannah Lacasse, Jonathan Shepard, and Aaisha Al Maamari. My name is Hillary, and I will be moderating the session.
I am Jonathan Shepard, University of Kentucky, and today I'm going to talk to you about the economics of hemp in the United States. It's going to be somewhat from a Kentucky perspective, but the implications, of course, are all over the U.S. as well. Kentucky hemp acreages from 2014 to 2021. You can see, there was significant growth over that time period, maxing out there in 2019 when we kind of had the big hemp craze, and then they dropped off significantly in 2021. And for 2022, we expect those numbers to be, very small as well, but, a 90% decrease in acres actually harvested from the height of our boom through last year. And of course, the reason behind that is the biomass pricing has decreased significantly from $1 in January of 20, which is, off significantly compared to what it was in the boom period of 2019, when we were looking at $5 and $6, a percent CBD. And now we're down, under 50 cents, 39 cents is actually what I'm going to show you here in the budgets. So just over this past 24-month period, 23-month period, we have lost 60% of that price. So if we look at our actual budgets, these are based off of, what we found here in Kentucky, but they have also, of course, included observations from throughout the US. And so we do believe that these budgets are applicable, across the US. We've got two CBD models that we look at. Our bare ground model, which if you've looked at our budgets in the past, we used to call that the tobacco model. It's now referred to as the bare ground model, but this is your typical cultivation, no plastic type production. And then our plastic culture budget. And in both cases, you can see that the returns above all specified cost are negative at a 7.5% CBD and a 39-cent price per percent CBD. Yeah, so my slides apparently are still not advancing again, and I don't know why my computer has decided to do this to me today, but it certainly has. So I also noticed that for some reason my camera is zooming in and out on its own as well. Let's just have a very awkward pause here for a minute. So I was just telling you the story that we all know about how CBD or hemp, primarily for CBD production, has lost a lot of interest, largely because of price drops and the fact that companies did not hold up their end of the bargain and that kind of thing. And we'd started talking about our CBD production budgets. For these are our draft budgets for 2022. They will be finished up here sometime soon, but we're going into 3 years out from whenever we had the incredible interest in CBD production throughout the U.S. and especially here in Kentucky, where we were instead of 39 cents per percent CBD, we were, over $6 in a lot of cases. And it still is just mind boggling. Even though we knew that this was going to happen, it's still a huge shift in that return above all specified cost, now showing negative, as opposed to what it used to show. But um, these budgets also do not have the updated H-2A guest worker program labor rate in them. So that number will actually go a little bit more negative. If you're using Kentucky's number, our H-2A wage rate went up almost $1 an hour. So, this is where we're at right now. Whenever you look at our budgets, we do include sensitivity tables where you can kind of get an idea of how things will change depending on CBD percentage and price per pound, per percent. The important thing here to remember is that we're having to attract hemp production away from other crops, right? So essentially, we're buying away from corn and soybeans, for example, or vegetables, or whatever the case may be. And so, if you think through, especially with commodity prices where they're at, I was looking at corn prices, 650 for fall delivery right now. Soybeans are, $16 or something like that. And of course, we all know about the supply chain issues and the inflation issues that we've had. But there's still a lot of profitability showing in a lot of cases for both corn and soybeans. And so, rough idea of, $300 to $400 an acre for corn and $400 per acre for beans. So, we don't really see that here. I mean, you're talking getting back up to that 1%, $1 per percent, at a 3%, or 80 cents at 4% before you start looking attractive to pull that acreage away from corn and soybeans, to hemp production. Of course, depending on where you're at in the United States, you may be competing with vegetable crops or something like that. The plasticulture is a little bit more sensitive, more expensive to produce, so we've got to have a little higher price or higher percentage or a combination thereof to overcome some of those costs. And you can see that here on this slide where you're looking at 7% and 60 cents to make it competitive with what a soybean crop is looking like for Kentucky for 2022. On the grain side of things, it's been relatively stable. These prices are just through October of last year, but we're at the 55 cents a pound. Grain prices have come down a little bit since April of 20, but stayed, for all intents and purposes, and especially relative to CBD, have stayed relatively constant. I'll show you our grain budgets as well, and our fiber budget. They still look attractive. I mean, from a profitability perspective, and by attractive, I mean they're not negative. So relative to CBD production, they're more promising. We all know the story with grain and fiber, the issue of the chicken or the egg scenario, where there are farmers out there that want to grow grain and want to grow fiber, but don't have a place to go with it, and really, that's kind of the bottleneck right now. Now, if you go back in time before we had these recent commodity price increases, hemp grain and hemp fiber were relatively competitive at those returns above all cost per acre, relatively competitive with corn and soybeans. Of course, in today's world, that is not the case. So you're still having to buy acres away in this scenario as well. Corn and soybean prices are not going to stay where they're at forever. So maybe for the foreseeable future, but it is something to keep an eye on, and really an area where there's probably going to be a lot of potential, if we can figure out, the processing side, and get that developed out, and when we may have some more opportunity there in the grain and fiber side. Um, as far as sensitivity goes on that, there's a lot less red on this sensitivity table than on the CBD side. But once again, still competing against very profitable grain crops right now, at least here in the short run, and then not having a market for it, or the demand for it not expanding out yet, still is going to hamper the number of people willing to jump into the grain production side. Fiber, same way. I continue to argue that the biggest issue on the fiber side is, we don't have the demand for fiber. We don't have the businesses, coming online that are demanding a whole lot of fiber. But that is something that may change here in the future. Just some anecdotal observations of my own, from what I'm seeing here in Kentucky. Some of the hemp that we've had in storage is starting to move, albeit very slowly, and not consistently. I've got several farmers that I work with that are, moving 20, 30,000 pounds, at a time, and it may be 6 months. And this is hemp that was grown in 2019. They've been able to maintain quality, but it's not consistent. They may get a contact from somebody from another state that's looking for 5,000 pounds, 10,000 pounds, and they move that amount, and then it may be another 3-6 months before they hear, anybody else that's looking for it. So I think that we are starting to work through some of that stores that we have. If you look at the biomass pricing slide that I showed you before, it shows a little bit of uptick there in the late fall of last year. I mean, early winter. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that in some cases there is not a supply issue, but supplies are tightening. I've been surprised. A lot of farmers have threatened to destroy that stuff they've had sitting in barns for a while. But even from an economic standpoint, we would argue that it's a sunk cost at this point. It's still hard to get over mentally, the time, effort, and money that's been put into that. And so, as long as they didn't need the space, they've kind of held on to it. The buyers out there are what I would kind of call bargain hunters. They are absolutely people looking to understandably buy this product cheap and make a good profit on it. There's been a lot of interest in certain varieties, and of course, if you've got ample supply, and you can be picky, if it's a buyer's market. And so I've had farmers that have had 100,000 pounds, but only 20,000 pounds of a certain variety that a potential buyer wants, and that's all they want. They want that specific variety. And of course, quality, is very important. We're still learning about how to store it, how well it stores, so on and so forth. Some is being destroyed. There have been storage issues, infestations, and a lot of that is just being destroyed, put in a manure spreader or pushed over a hill somewhere. Anecdotally as well, there are a couple new producers that aren't from Kentucky but are interested in contracting with Kentucky growers. And that leads me into what I'm going to talk about next as far as contracting is concerned. But I was kind of surprised that there's still some people out there that are wanting to make a go of this, and they think that they've learned a lot since 2019. However, hemp, for those that have grown it for the CBD side, especially here in Kentucky, and then for people that are still setting on a whole lot of um, undemanded material, hemp is really a four-letter word for them. And so I know some farmers that have been approached and have been burnt bad enough that they won't even consider it. And then on the other hand, I've got some farmers that are truly considering, maybe not going as big as they did in 2019, but or entertaining at least putting out 20 or 30 acres or something like that. As I said, that brings me into the whole contracting side of things. Nothing here is really changed, in my opinion. This is still the narrative that I'm giving farmers as far as if they are interested in potentially growing hemp again, just remembering, the lessons that we learned in 2019. Um, Even with these new people coming in that are interested in contracting with some Kentucky growers, this is my first comment to those farmers. You know, what does that contract look like? If you are going to insure the crop, you've got to have the contract to get it insured, but is that contract even worth the paper that it is printed on? What is the structure of that contract? Is it actually enforceable? Understanding the production restrictions, timelines, and benchmarks that have to be met by the farmer. All that, the devil in the details type stuff that we have to concern ourselves with. Same thing that, we were talking about, that we have been talking about for years, is, the genetics, who owns the genetics. What are the responsibilities of the farmer to protect those genetics? So on and so forth. Um, it is legal to lend to hemp producers, as we all know, but there were enough people that got burnt bad enough that at least here locally, most lenders will not even entertain the idea of lending to hemp producers, just because those it's left a very bitter taste in a lot of people's mouth. And honestly, the banks kind of got left holding the bag in some of those cases as well. A lot of lenders actually lended money on hemp production and didn't necessarily know, and certainly did not agree for their funds to be used in that manner. So that's why I ask, are you committing mortgage fraud? So always something to be of concern about if you are borrowing money through an operating note, something like that, and you are planning on growing hemp, but you're telling the bank that you're growing tobacco, corn, and beans. That's a no-no, and you can get yourself in trouble there. So where is the money going to come from if you can't get access to capital or sufficient access to capital? That's something that you've got to make sure that you've got well handled. And what is the ability of your operation to bear the financial risk if there is a repeat of what we've seen before? So if I were to grow hemp, I would make sure that I do my due diligence. I would make sure that I understood the company that I would be contracting with. I would ask a lot of very invasive questions about the financial health of the business, their investors. I would want to see reports. I'd want to see things in writing. I would want to see things audited by people who were qualified to do that, such as CPA firms, things like that. I would also not sign any contract that did not stipulate that, there's an escrow established where, at least part of the money is put in escrow prior to production. And then as the farmer or the producer reaches certain milestones, then, access to that money is given or paid, I should say. And also, I would want to fully understand the genetics side of things, fully understand the genetics that I would be planting. I would not want to be left financially responsible for the cost of production if the crop has to be destroyed because of THC levels above the legal limit. As I mentioned, our H2A, our adverse wage rate here in Kentucky increased almost $1 an hour. So, you know, you have a lot of labor cost. And I would not want to be the one holding the bag there. If I'm, you know, going out on my own, and you know, or I, as the farmer, am responsible for purchasing my own genetics, um, you know, I would want to research the genetics supplier, what kind of guarantees are in place. You know, this part of the hemp sector, of course, is improving and growing by leaps and bounds, but you know, we're still a far way off from some of the more typical commodities as far as quality assurance of the genetics and certification. So I would want to make sure that I fully understand, you know, the genetics that I'm buying, and look for some kind of guarantee that I am actually receiving what I think that I am buying. And the same thing, as I've said before, am I able to bear that financial risk? And is there a plan B? And I would strongly encourage people to have a plan B, and possibly not consider it if there isn't a way to you know, recoup some of those costs if the original plan falls through. And of course, I would ask around about, you know, the company that I'm dealing with, genetic wise, other people's experience. That goes, you know, for processors and genetic companies. And as always, I would encourage, you know, anytime that you're entering into any kind of a legal situation, I would strongly encourage people to involve a lawyer. I've noticed in agriculture that sometimes we are relatively hesitant to go that route. Everything is done on, you know, a handshake and, you know, goodwill. We're just talking, you know, too much money, too much risk, with no backup, to not spend that little bit of money that it would take to get an expert in to help us fully understand what our risk position is. You know, if I'm growing corn, or I'm growing vegetables and things go south with the person I'm contracted with, I'm probably going to be able to definitely be able to get rid of the corn. I'm probably going to be able to find another market for the vegetables. You know, we're just not there with hemp not being a commodity yet. So it's totally worth the time and effort and expense of fully vetting these companies, these people, and doing a really good job of due diligence on your part. There is my contact email. You're more than welcome to reach out to me directly if you have any questions on the budgets, any questions about anything that I've talked about today. I'll be more than happy to help you out.
So I'm Aaisha Al Maamari. I'm a PhD candidate from Colorado State University, and I am going to present economic impact analysis and contribution of hemp-based industries to the local economy using input-output modeling. And first, I would like to introduce InPlan or input-output modeling team. And thank you, Hannah, for introducing the big team. The modeling team, first, Rebecca Hill. She is the supervisor of the modeling project from Colorado State University. Hannah Zezes from University of Vermont, and Jonathan from University of Kentucky. So first, I will start with 4 guiding questions to give some insights of what we are doing and why it matters. First, how hemp industry is connected to the local economy via input purchase, output sale, and employment. And why will change in, or how will change in industrial hemp production and processing will change the economic activity in the local economy, and how our changes in the economic activity are distributed among stakeholders, including businesses, households, and governments in the local economy. And finally, what are the impacts of different user scenarios or shocks to the demand and supply of hemp production? And so by the end of this modeling project, we intend to deliver the following objectives. First, construction of state input-output models. And we are modeling for 3 states, Colorado, Kentucky, and Vermont. And then we are developing some scenarios and analyzing the economic impact of those scenarios. And finally, we are developing some metrics for what if tools to analyze the impact of specified changes and different shocks to the hemp production. Okay, so first, input-output analysis allows us to examine a change or impact of one economic activity of specific industry into the entire economy. So in this figure, hemp industry is a one small industry in the broader economy. And in our model, we show that hemp production is the primary industry, and it's linked to the local economy or other industries in 2 ways. First, the backward linkage and supply chain, and forward linkage in the supply chain. For the backward linkage, it's through the spending to purchase inputs from other industries or payment to labor working in hemp production. And the forward linkage in the supply chain is or to evaluate how hemp output is used as input by other industries or sold to the final consumer or exported outside the state. So input-output model allow us to track dollar change that's spent by hemp production along the supply chain or between industries, which is the concept of multiplier effects. And I'm going to explain that one in the coming slides. Okay, so just to highlight that we are tracking economic activity or change or hemp production along the supply chain. So we are modeling for 3 small industries, hemp production, hemp processing, and farther down the supply chain to include retail sector and wholesale sector. And we are looking for industrial hemp used for CBD, for fiber, and for grain. Okay, here's the multiplier, and input-output analysis uses multiplier to represent the relationship between industries or to estimate the economic impact of money rippling through an economy. The multiplier effects are the effects of how every dollar spent in hemp production ripples through an economy. To simply illustrate the concepts, let's assume in this figure that $1 is spent on export sale by hemp industry, and out of that $1, 40 cents stays in the region and 60 cents leaves the region, maybe for handling or processing the shipment. And in the next round, out of that 40 cents that stays in the region, 60 cents also stays in the region, and 24 cents leaves the region or leaves the state. And so on until the last round. And in order to calculate the multiplier or full impacts, we add all those dollars value that stays in the region. And so here we can say that for every $1 spent on export sale, it creates $1.66 contribution to the overall revenue in this specific region or this state. So multipliers captures the economic impacts, and economic impacts actually broken into 3 different impacts. Here's those impacts, the direct, indirect, and induced impacts or effects. So first, the direct effects is the initial change in hemp industry due to the direct sale of the final products. It's the total income paid to labor or total jobs in this sector or employment in hemp industry. The second one, indirect effects, which captures the backward linkage or backward relationship in the supply chain. And it occurs because hemp production purchase inputs and other services from other industries to run the business. And this creates increased purchase by those other industries along the supply chain to provide all these inputs and all those supplies like fertilizers, seeds, and transportation. Finally, the induced effects captures the change in the local economy due to change in household spending or change in the spending by employees working in hemp industries. Because employees in hemp industry are paid wages and they spend this money at grocery stores, at restaurants, or other places. And this spending create induced effects along the supply chain. So the sum of all those three effects give us the total economic effect or the contribution of hemp industry to the local economy. And I just want to highlight that we are calculating the impact for three variables: for output, for employment, and for labor income. So after calculating the impact, the current impact, so we are going to run some analysis and see how our impacts would change. And this analysis actually would address the long and short-term effects of different shocks to the demand or supply to hemp industry. So the proposed scenarios are the following. First scenario, to see what if there is a shift in demand and we move some acreage from CBD hemp cultivation to fiber or grain. And second, what if there is a reduction in acreage destroyed due to THC level? And we can show that one in our model by increasing the cultivated output without changing the input cost to reflect the increase in THC limit. The third scenario is the land use change scenario, which is by reducing output in wheat and tobacco or other crops to account for hemp production. The fourth scenario is hemp in storage or flood market scenario, which is reflected in the model by decreasing CBD cultivation, but keeping the sales steady or at the same level to reflect the stored biomass being sold rather than the fresh one. The fifth scenario is that we are going to increase the capacity in the processing sector. And one way to do that is by reducing the losses from cultivation sector. For scenarios 6 and 7, we are creating some shocks to the processing and retail sector. So scenario 6, what if there is a shift in demand and the proportion of sale has changed for CBD or grain or fiber final products? And scenario 7, what if there is an increase in the import of raw hemp or hemp final products compared to what has been exported or what has been locally sourced? So through these scenarios, we can see how our economic impact or multipliers change, or what is the economic contribution of hemp industry. So finally, I would like to highlight some of the modeling challenges we face while modeling. So first challenge is data challenge, specifically for processing and retail sector. Because some data are hard to find and collect, especially we are working at aggregated level, at state level. Such data as capital investment cost and expenditure data, sector hemp input or raw hemp, how much of raw hemp come from local source and how much come from outside the state, and output data or revenue data for processing and retail sector, as well as employment and labor income data. The other challenge is that we started building the model and collecting data for year 2020 because the model should be static for one time period. And as you observe that year 2020 characterized by low level of employment, lower output and lower acreage planted compared to other years because of pandemic situation. So with all these restrictions, we are trying to overcome those challenges and building a solid model that uses existing sectors to model this proportion of sale using some standard expenditure budget to figure out the spending by hemp industry. And we are building some scenarios actually to allow users to change some variables and see what is the resulting impact. Like, what if we change the number or proportion of acres planted, if we change the proportion of sale and other variables. So yeah, that was an overview of some of modeling concepts and modeling overview. Thank you. And if you get any questions, please email them to me or to Rebecca Hall, and or just put them in the chat.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Falkner, and I am a master's candidate at the University of Vermont in the Department of Community Development and Applied Economics. And today I will be presenting a content analysis of state and tribal hemp production plans on behalf of my research team, which is a product of the USDA NEFA Foundational Grant and a collaboration between Colorado State University, the University of Kentucky, and the University of Vermont. So the objectives of this research study are listed here on the slide, which were number one, to examine the consistency of terms within state and tribal hemp plans after the introduction of the final rule for hemp. And number two, to provide recommendations on how to improve the clarity of these terms for hemp producers, thus mitigating regulatory confusion, impeding the success of the hemp industry. Now, I know that this was shown earlier in the keynote talk, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least address it because this is a huge part of the research itself. Displayed here is the timeline outlining hemp policy in the United States, beginning with the reintroduction of hemp in the 2014 Farm Bill. The 2014 Farm Bill introduced the Legitimacy of Hemp Research Program, which allowed pilot programs for hemp production. And then hemp production was formally legalized with the 2018 Farm Bill. And at this point, inconsistencies between production plans had already been noted and researched. So the 2018 Farm Bill made significant changes to the existing regulatory framework of the 2014 pilot plan, which we will see further complicated these existing inconsistencies across state plans. One of the first things that the Farm Bill did was it brought in the scope to include tribal governments, whereas previous regulations had only allowed states to develop production plans. And in addition, it created the interim final rule and final rule for hemp production, which resulted in the USDA hemp producer license, under which states and tribal governments could choose to operate. The final rule for hemp production partially clarified the regulation requirements for U.S. state and tribal governments, and it provided a regulatory baseline that must be adhered to. The U.S. state and tribal governments were allowed to submit initial or revised individualized plans up until December 3rd, 2021, and that would allow them to incorporate the USDA hemp producer license regulations and include any clauses that were specific to the needs of that state or tribe. And as we will see, while this did allow for individual amendments, it also perpetuated the ongoing lack of consistency between all of the plans. The cutoff date for this research analysis was July 14th, 2021. We utilized the USDA AMS webpage to capture the status of all state and tribal hemp production plans as of that date. And here we can see that our analysis found that there were 67 independently approved production plans, 6 which were operating under the USDA hemp producer license, 20 which were continuing under the 2014 pilot, 2 that were drafting a plan for the USDA review, 7 that were under review, and 2 that were pending legislation. So a lot of variety at that stage. And while preparing for this conference, I took a look back to the same webpage to see the current statuses of what the plans were. And while we can see that there's less variation between the stages of drafting and approval, there are now 96 individualized hemp production plans, which, as I will discuss in the slide to come, likely did not help the issues of inconsistency between these production plans. Here we have a schematic which outlines how the research team conducted the content analysis. To begin, the team documented all terms and definitions included in the 69 plans that were included in this analysis. And those 69 plans were made up of the 67 individual approved plans and the hemp production license and the pilot plan itself. A second coder then went through and completed a subsequent round of a content analysis to make sure that all of the terms were included. They were very long documents with lots of words and a lot to go through. As Tyler mentioned, we had dreams about them for days. So we wanted to make sure that we ensured intercoder reliability, and we had somebody go through and check that again for us. If terms were noted to have been included in only one plan, as you can see on the bottom here, they were not analyzed any further. If a term was to be included in more than one plan, they were analyzed according to how many times they appeared. So if a term was within the 95th percentile, which we determined were those most commonly included, then we analyzed them for consistency within the definitions of each of these terms. And if a term was included more than once, but not frequently enough to fall within the 95th percentile, then they were further analyzed to search for different terms which had the same definition. And so I'm positive that this is very confusing right now, but hopefully the results that I have to share next will help to clarify it a little bit. This graph is one of our findings. It shows a number of plans which included the most common terms. Most common, again, was defined as those which fell in the 95th percentile, and this was based on the number of plans to include a term out of the total of 69 plans. So 24 terms listed here were within this 95th percentile, ranging from 18 to 51 times that a certain term was included. As we can see here, hemp was the most commonly included term, appearing 51 times, which makes sense because these are hemp program or hemp production programs. But interestingly, if you look down the line, you can see, for example, THC was only included in 29 of the 69 plans and cultivate in only 19 of them. But most importantly to note from this is that none of these most common terms appeared in all 69 of the plans. We broke these terms down even farther just to see how consistent the definitions that were provided for them by each plan was. It's important to note that slight variation in verbiage and grammar was disregarded when determining the most common definition. Here you can see the term name, the percentage of plans included the term out of the total of 69, and the number of plans which included the percentage of plans which included the most common definition of each term. And so the consistency between definitions ranged from 0 to 100. Only one of the terms was defined the same throughout all of the plans that included it, which was commercial sales. And on the flip side of things, licensee had no definition consistency and thus no common definition. And this provides evidence that the introduction of the final rule for hemp production has not mitigated the overwhelming inconsistencies that were first noted back in 2018. For the terms that occurred more than once, but less than those that were in the 95th percentile, we categorized them based on ones that had the same or very similar definitions, but different names. So for example, here we found 8 different groups total, but I only chose 4 to show here because of room on the slide. We have, for example, up in the top right, there's the hemp category, which includes the terms hemp or industrial hemp, or hemp. And those are all listed because they all of those definitions for those terms were meant to define hemp. And again, the slight variations in verbiage and grammar were disregarded when we went through this categorization process. But so this here demonstrates 4 of the 8 groups that we found where several different terms had the same definition. And here's just a quick example of some of the terms that we found that were included only once. In total, 241 of the terms were included in only one plan. And it's interesting to think about this and look at some of the ones I chose in particular, because, for example, you would imagine that hemp plant or certified hemp seed might occur in more than one hemp production plan. So here we have our expectations versus reality. We came into this study expecting to find that the final hemp rule would mitigate these inconsistencies created by disjointed legislation, as you saw on that policy timeline, and expecting to see some sort of uniformity across production plans. But in reality, what we found was 421 different terms, of which 241 had been included only once, and there was inconsistent term names and incongruous term definitions. And while the varying terminology in state and tribal hemp plans is likely due to different colloquialisms across the country, these disparities can create regulatory confusion. And since hemp is likely to be transported and marketed across state, tribal, international borders, the differences in regulatory language at such an early stage create a challenge for actors throughout the supply chain, including producers. Sorry, I just got a notification on here. Okay, sorry, including producers, input suppliers, processors, marketers, consumers, and these inconsistencies limit future expansion by creating additional barriers. As a lot of us know, a major barrier to the success of the reintroduction of hemp in the United States agricultural sector is its association with marijuana. And if we are to assume that the objective of a federally approved hemp production plan is to mitigate the ability of hemp producers to be able to abuse this license and grow cannabis to cultivate marijuana instead of hemp, it's reasonable then to believe that these incongruent plans makes this challenging to prevent. This presents several threats to the success of the reintroduction of hemp, notably, again, the confusion of consumers and the inability to engage in interstate commerce. Thus, ensuring that the 2 plants remain separate crops is going to be and has been integral to ensuring the prosperity of this crop. And one thing that's important to note is that while our research team has concluded that the independent state and tribal hemp plans are noticeably inconsistent, the presence of varying terminology is not indicative of a true discrepancy in the production of hemp between these entities. Without being familiar with the intricacies of each hemp production plan, we're truly unable to say to which degree these practices of each state and tribal government differ, but findings of this study point to the fact that there is likely some discordance between hemp production in each state and tribal government that has an approved independent plan. So with that said, findings from the study point to areas in need of uniformity and consistency as the regulatory framework is modified and provides a starting point for federal policymakers. And based on the conclusions of these analyses, it appears that current regulatory flexibility has created an environment that fosters competitive advantages among state and tribal governments, depending on the content that's within their independent plans. So based on our findings, the research team has 2 main suggestions. Number 1, that the USDA provide and define basic regulatory language for independent plans to follow. While the USDA hemp producer license itself does provide some terminologies and definitions, it's not required that plans choosing to operate under their individually approved plans adhere to these. And by creating an expanded list of terms and corresponding definitions that must be ubiquitous among states and tribal plans, the USDA can then provide a lexicon to help hemp producers alleviate these discrepancies in how production is approached and defined. And second, we suggest the creation of regulations for the rest of the hemp supply chain. And while we are aware that the USDA does not have jurisdiction over the processing of hemp or any other steps post-harvest, we feel that it will be beneficial for the appropriate entities to provide these regulations to ensure that once the hemp is cleared on the post-harvest side, the integrity of the hemp programs is maintained and are not allowed to infiltrate the marijuana business. And with that, I've listed all of the citations that we used in this manuscript that we have sent off for publication. My contact email is down there below, as well as Jane Kolodinsky, who was the PI at the University of Vermont. If you have any questions, which I have a feeling a lot of people will, I'm happy to answer them here or via email or whatever works best for everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to present today.
My name is Hannah Lacasse. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Vermont in the Department of Community Development and Applied Economics. And I will be talking to you today about the consumer side of hemp and presenting some information from our data set, looking at a sample of Vermont consumers, as well as a peek at our national data set that we just got in. And I also want to just say before the rest of my colleagues go that we are all a part of a USDA NEFA foundational grant, working with Dr. Jane Kolodinsky, Tyler Mark, Rebecca Hill, and Will Snell at the University of Vermont, Colorado State, and the University of Kentucky. So what we're presenting on today are some of the projects that we've been working on as a grant team, and are looking forward to sharing with you what we've been up to for the last couple of years. And so again, I'm going to be talking today about the consumer side. And so, as we all are probably already familiar with the course of hemp production after the 2018 Farm Bill, we first saw a tremendous rise in registered acreage and licenses across the country, followed by an overall drop after 2019, largely because of the CBD market oversaturating and prices falling. And though CBD continues to dominate the market, it's just one piece of the hemp supply chain. We can see here that other hemp-based products appear to be of interest to consumers as well. And this highlights an opportunity for the pursuit of other hemp-based products for a more resilient hemp sector overall, particularly in light of the barriers restricting producers focused at least on CBD alone. And so here we can see that not only did interest in production rise once hemp was legalized, but so did public interest. And so the first graph on the left shows the number of news articles featuring the words hemp or CBD, hemp being the yellow line, CBD being the purple line. The second graph on the right shows Google Trend data for hemp and CBD, hemp in the blue and CBD in pink. And this shows the popularity of each search term relative to the total searches during that time period, which is 2014 to 2022. So this, if we look at the pink line for CBD on Google Trends graph on the right, we can see that interest peaked in April 2019 and in September 2021 compared to all other searches in that time frame. And so from these graphs, we can see that up until 2019, the public was seeking information about hemp. And that makes sense. There was excitement associated with hemp's potential and a lot of media buzz regarding its legalization. And as Jane mentioned in the keynote, this dialogue was likely to be a source of publicity and information conveyance to consumers over the last few years. But as we can also see from these graphs, the buzz of hemp as a new industry also appears to be fading. Starting in early 2019, we can see that the media and internet popularity for hemp has dropped. And despite a slight increase in 2020, especially we see that spike for CBD in Google searches, that may be due to the pandemic interest, but overall interest has begun to wane. Given hemp's historic regulatory controversy, its re-entry into the market probably received more attention than most new products would, especially since hemp is not just one product, it's an input for many types of products. And so producers who are depending on that media buzz to carry the sort of advertising weight of hemp-based products may soon find that this reliance can't really be sustained. Though demand for hemp-based products is certainly growing, these search results show that public attention towards hemp may be phasing out if we don't continue to put focus on hemp products. Because if the media is not as much focused on hemp, that will limit the ease of information access consumers and producers once had. And so for hemp to succeed, we really need to pay attention to the hemp consumer and keep hemp-based products in consumer line of sight. Otherwise, they may forget and move on to the next innovation or stick with a conventional product alternative. And so to market this seemingly new product, we need to understand how this crop with so much historic regulatory baggage is perceived by consumers and what attributes of hemp products are appealing or not appealing. And so we are trying to answer this question. In 2021, we surveyed Vermont residents to try and understand what those values might look like. We used a representative online survey of Vermont residents, exploring how consumer perceptions, support for marijuana legalization, and sociopolitical demographic characteristics influence whether a respondent rejects a hemp product or chooses a hemp product. And so by reject, I mean that they do not intend to use the product in the future. And by choice, I mean they do intend to use the product in the future. And some of those perception statements that we ask include whether respondents perceive hemp products to be available, affordable, have health benefits, even though we saw in the keynote, again, there are regulatory concerns about claiming those health benefits, whether hemp products are palatable or durable. We also ask more general hemp perception statements regarding hemp, and those include THC content, input requirements, environmental friendliness, and local purchase. And then finally, for marijuana legalization, we asked about the extent of support for both medicinal and recreational legalization. And so in that exploration, our final output results in these significant variables for each product category. So what you're seeing in this chart to the right are variables that either decrease the probability of rejection, so the purplish down arrow, or increase the probability of choice, the bluish greening up arrow. And so for each product, we see that, for example, at the top, affordability both decreases the probability of rejection and increases the probability of choice for CBD products. And we can kind of see that different perceptions and demographic characteristics are associated with different products. So for example, support for medicinal marijuana legalization decreases the probability of rejection for hemp clothing, while recreational marijuana support decreases the probability of rejection for hemp food. And so what does this mean? These findings suggest that one, market strategies are probably going to need to be differentiated for different hemp products. And two, the fact that a product contains hemp may not alone be enough reason to motivate consumer choice. We know that hemp can be made into hundreds of different products, and we know that those products are likely used for various reasons, not just because they contain hemp ingredients. I also want to highlight that all but two products are associated with local, meaning that consumers were either less likely to reject or more likely to choose a product if they, in a statement, agreed that they are more likely to purchase a product if it was made locally. And so origin labels can be used to convey product quality and processing standards to consumers. In Vermont, for example, made in Vermont labels on maple syrup and dairy products can convey high product quality to consumers generally, and also motivate local consumers to support their communities. And so these qualities appear to translate to emerging hemp products and point to potential for niche markets to capture consumer values and needs. And consumer gravitation towards local products may indicate an opportunity for state producers to create reliable production standards and develop niche origin-based markets to command price premiums in order to thrive in this otherwise pretty turbulent landscape. And now these Vermont specific findings are really important, especially to those of you engaging in the Vermont hemp market. But our next steps are to now understand the national segment of hemp consumers, not only to generate a knowledge base that's relevant to a broader set of hemp stakeholders, but also to determine if Vermont consumers are an oddity in the hemp market, or if we're a bellwether for the rest of the country. And so to do this, we have recently completed a national consumer survey derived of a panel of about 2,000 US consumers. And this online survey is based off of questions we asked Vermont residents in the data I presented previously, but amplified to include additional perception statements, information seeking behavior, label preferences, sources of information, and trust. And so this is really exciting because we have a lot of data that we'll be able to share with you in the future. And today I want to give you kind of a brief look at what some of this data may look like. We just got it in, so it's very descriptive right now, but we wanted to give you some insight to what that data are going to look like and what we'll be able to share in the future. And so here we see how respondents seek or don't seek for information on hemp. And so we can see that 40% of respondents have heard or seen information on hemp products, but they don't actively seek for them. And 33% do pay attention, but only if they happen to see it. And 16% actively seek for information on hemp products. And as Jane mentioned in the keynote, this helps us figure out how we can move consumers towards more choice and pay attention to labeling in hemp products. And now the next step of this analysis would be to see what consumer characteristics or those perception statements are associated with these types of behaviors. And then we can develop typologies of hemp consumers to better inform market strategies. Here we can see familiarity with different hemp product categories. Unsurprisingly, the majority of respondents are familiar with CBD, but 40 to 50% of respondents are also familiar with clothing, food products, personal care products, and rope. And so this again just highlights the importance of research on other types of hemp products, not just CBD. Consumers are familiar with other hemp products, they're using other types of hemp products. And so of those folks who are familiar with a given hemp product, we now can see if they have used that product before. Again, we see that CBD has the highest proportion of respondents with prior use compared to other products, but we also see prior use for products such as clothing, paper, plastics, and rope. I also want to highlight one interesting thing in this graph is that few respondents don't know whether they've used CBD. So if you see that gray line next to CBD, that's only 5% of people who are familiar with CBD are not sure whether they've used it before or not. Meanwhile, the majority of respondents for other products don't know whether they've used them. So those gray lines for other products. And so what this might mean is an opportunity to better market or make more widely accessible other types of hemp-based products. Especially if we think about those consumers who would fall into that active information seeker category we saw in the previous slide. And this slide, a bit overwhelming, but I just wanted to demonstrate the direction we're heading in next, which is to replicate that study I shared using Vermont-specific data. So we'll be looking at what values and perceptions of hemp products are associated with the consumer's decision to choose that product. To better inform market strategies and stakeholder decision-making. And so here in this graph, we're seeing whether respondents agree or disagree with hemp products being durable, palatable, healthy, affordable, and available. And just to provide a bit of a snapshot that's a little bit more easily digestible, here we see perceptions regarding durability of different hemp products. And even though we can't associate these variables with consumer use just yet, we can already see that there is variation across different hemp products, with the majority of respondents agreeing that hemp plastics are durable, for example, and a lower 39% of respondents thinking clothing and rope are durable compared to compared to product alternatives that are not hemp-based. And again, we can also look at perceptions regarding affordability. We see that 58% of respondents perceive personal care products and plastics to be affordable, while clothing and rope have a lower, but still high, 46% agreement rate. And so again, we can't say which of these variables significantly influence consumer behavior yet, but we can see that the variation present in the Vermont sample may also be present in this national sample. And that's what we'll be exploring in the next steps of our research. And so with the Vermont data and a brief look at our national data, we can see that the importance of research on non-CBD products, given that consumer values appear to vary across types of hemp products. And consumer research is also important generally. We know that data across the supply chain is limited, but growing, and much of that consumer-related data is focused on CBD, and many are sort of hidden behind industry paywalls. And so we're really looking to generate open and easily accessible, meaningful data to help move this sector in a positive direction. And so again, some of our next steps with the national data are to develop those typologies of the hemp consumer based on the information seeking behavior we saw before. And we'll also be exploring hemp labeling and trust, such as THC content and those organic and natural labels. And so thank you so much for your time, and to Heather and the rest of the conference crew for allowing us to present today. Very happy to take questions here or continue conversations offline. My email is below, and I can also put it in the chat.